A Letter to Agnes by Brandish Gilhelm, based on true events. 3 pages only were recovered from the HMS Octavius. Brittle as ash was the captain's log, having spent slow decades in the hideous cold of Barrow Bay and beyond. They're all that remain, and I'm trapped here with them. Days I've been holed up here in my flat on Penny Street, just down the cobble from Old Tarney Brew Pub. Trapped, and God's merciful son, I'm doomed. It's early fall, but my fingers are like ice. The next breeze will be the death of me, so I'm writing this account to save what poor soul finds my blue corpse. The first 2 pages are nautical chart work and crew logging. They confirmed for me and my doomed crewmates our theory of the vessel's course and gave us what was required to piece together the fated journey. Captain Harold, in his hubris, not only brought his only son on that journey, a boy no older than 8, but also dared the North Sea Passage to return from Port Snow, spices, gold, and gar in the hold. Riches awaited him, no doubt, but death craved that bounty. It was October's early weeks that our ship, the Henrik's Resolve, was dispatched to retrace his possible route and reconnoiter any treasure still in the great ship, any crew also to be recovered, if possible. The cargo was enough to garner royal attention, and we were dispatched with all the best fittings and men. Only 20 days' sail needed we to find the old girl, adrift in the riptides north of Aphosian shores, where only madmen make sail in the ice daggers beyond elven protection. Our captain, a fine man named Stiles, was one of the greatest seafarers I've had the pleasure to serve, and his instinct for currents and riptides was uncanny. Through his wits alone we found the ice ship, and gods above I wish we never had. Now I'm trapped here in my little room, waiting for terrible death. How could we have known? 23 of us were there in all. A full complement of bright hearts and well-paid explorers and linemen, and once we spotted the Octavius, 8 away men were sent in 2 dinghies to set ropes, probe the newly thickening ice, and contact any crew still alive. The Octavius had vanished almost 12 years prior, but we had heard of survival at sea even longer than that, and so our protocols held. The dread that grew in my heart as we rowed away from Henrik's Resolve. Oh, mercy on those men whose last breaths were taken in the crisp air, futile death. As we approached, the lamps of our great vessel behind fading in mid-morning mists, the temperature dropped at a sudden and unnatural rate. Salt water iced the gunwale rails, and milky clear daggers were bobbing up in the churn. One man, Funtz was his name among our group, had underdressed, wearing only sweater and coveralls, with thigh boots now filling with slush and frost. He had blue lips all too soon, and uncontrollable shivers before we even brought the rail hooks to pull ourselves in. And that was the first moment we knew death was stalking us in the ice. Funtz stumbled with his rope, pitched over the side, and into the black water he went. He didn't struggle, or scream, or flap his arms. No cold water shock at all. He simply sank. We could see his pale face, illuminated by colorless morning sunlight, dwindle down in the 2 clear deeps. And how I wish I hadn't looked, but I saw him, eyes bulging like a gutted fish, fading down and down into dead black depths. There was no turning back. The dinghies were icing over by the minute. I've never seen cold like that. One oar was already frozen fast to the derelict sidewalls like a fly stuck in glue. We secured the lines and scurried up knotted plank steps in a panic as the rowboats were glazed over in a layer of clear glass. It had only been seconds. Here the 7 remaining of us rallied at the railside, and the low mist slid over the Octavius, obscuring any view of the command deck or aft quarters. Her starboard side was intact. In fact, we saw no sign of damage at all. Each man checked the one to his left, 7 present. Our best oarsman, Pug was his nickname, did not look good. His pink nose was adrip with ice, and his eyes were milking with a freeze. Then he began that shiver. Once those tremors took hold of him, I swear we watched him die in the span of 5 breaths. He leaned back, went rigid. 2 men moved forward to help him, but he sort of lurched, convulsed. His tongue swole right out of his mouth like a month-old corpse in the sewer. And then he just went rigid, pale blue, and fell to one side like a wooden doll. The 6 of us felt cold fear run down our backs. Calls were made to the Henrik's Resolve, out across the water, but we were out too far. Beyond a set of waves that was clattering with ice, we were alone. Our away captain, Jones, ordered 2 of us to find lifeboats. The other 4 were to sweep the deck and hull and report back. We were given a span of minutes to meet at the foremast, 2 by 2, and keep our blood stirring. I was paired with Jones himself, and set aft to explore the captain's cabin and make for journals and larder. If a fireplace could be found, it could buy us time. The other 4 went their way. As we went, stepping like clumsy frogs on the ice-slick deck, the incredible age of the vessel struck me. It was rusted, corroded, peeling, cracking. All paint had gone. The ropes were withered to black vines, and every scrap of cloth was ice-sheathed in unholy contortions that reminded me of Funce's dead face in the deep. Jones beckoned us forward. The rudder deck was coming into view, up 6 stout stairs, as was the design back then. The mist cleared, and we saw the shape of a man in the haze. Jones called to him, took a step forward, called again. The mist cleared, and sure enough, a stout rudderman was there stationed, hand on prow and eyes straight ahead. One more step took we, and realized this was a dead man. Filling with dread, we made our way closer. Jones more courageous than me, and saw the corpse up close. His hands were fused into the prow lever and the trim line. Fused! The flesh had been dissolved or made gelatinous by the salt wind and then frozen solid. Gods, those melted, rigid fingers in the blue breeze. And worse, so much worse, were those dead eyes. Forever the dead face looked far forward, up beyond the ship's bow and off onto the horizon. What a fate, that poor soul. Jones and I were shaken, but there was no time, and we could feel our blood going cold. The captain's door was nearby, and so we pushed ahead. I wish we had never opened that creaking door of ice. Even to survive the expedition was no longer a kind of hope, for the scene within was enough to make a man beg for death, or spend his days laughing in the iron hell of Pavalia or New Haven Asylum. Piled there in pitiful doom were the entire crew of the Octavius. I've seen bodies in my travels, and so I can manage that, but this was a phantasm of hell. Not lying or slumped were these men, but frozen as if time had stopped in a single second. One looked as if he was mid-sentence when death found him, his mouth agape, eyes looking to one side, frozen there with a clear gaze. 2 others were struck in claw-fingered feud over some kind of desiccated meat or dried fish. But on inspection, another man, eyes now frozen shut, had his left thigh dissected into cubic cuts and slices. Still others held in a frozen, dead embrace, and one was at the window. His forehead had frozen against the glass pane with a column of ice that blurred the eyes and mouth, but refracted it through clear freeze into a scream from hell's nightmares. Finally, at the center of that scene was Captain Harold himself. Jones stopped in his tracks, and I saw him shiver when he looked at that grisly, grisly visage. Harold was at his desk, a full meal frozen solid nearby. In one blue hand, a quill's frosty feather still stood, and under his skinless face, a sheaf of papers. The cold had peeled his skin from his blue skull over the decades, curling to the sides and away from the teeth, eyes and cheekbones bare. It was awful. It was a white-eyed howl without sound. Only the waves outside and the dead rigging held our ears from madness. Jones bid me retrieve the journal. I did not want to, but I've never shirked any order on any crew, and I felt my feet move on their own. Every step closer, the air froze. It hissed. It crackled with an audible sound of cold, the sound of freezing. Another step, and I was within arm's reach of the ghouls, 36 of them at least, like some macabre Last Supper in the tomb of Lazarus. My breath trembled. Captain Harold screamed at me with that skinless skull, but my valor held, and I reached to the journal. Wrenching it free, most of the pages simply crumbled to nothing, and even the quill just disintegrated into frost. 3 pages in hand, preserved by some freak of natural freeze, I heard a sound on the freezing air. Beyond the cracking hiss, it was a whisper, a voice, saying a name. I shook the pages free and turned, and then the nightmare expanded. Jones was dead in front of me. His eyes were fixed on Captain Harold's horrible face, and arms in front of him as if warding a gargoyle or bad dream. He was frozen in that pose of abject terror. And I ran, slipping and stumbling, hearing that damned voice on the air, the whispering. The men called to me, having rigged a lifeboat. 4 of us had been claimed by the cold, and we launched the dinghy post-haste. Another man went rigid in the return trip, dead at his oar, and just to escape looking at his wide-eyed death mask, I glanced back at the Octavius. That haunted hell ship, alone and silent for all those years in the ice. Why did I look? It was just sitting there. A great dead silhouette in the foggy cold. Silent and doomed with a crew of corpses. I'll never forget the shape of that blasted demon ship against the clouds. God, I wish I could. To Henrik's resolve, we made our way. By the grace of Udin, we made it. We were hauled up, and all of us freezing and blue-lipped. To our warm hull we went and shivered for weeks. Still, Captain Stiles was pleased with our recovery, for what it was, and he believed our tale. He deemed it too dangerous to dare the bounty aboard the Octavius and bid us swift sail back to port. I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning of the terrors, not the end. The journal pages were kept in Stiles' cabin. When I was well enough, I requested an examination of them. That was 2 days after the ordeal. As I mentioned, 2 of the pages were standard fare. The third, though, was a letter. The frozen quill had left a jagged scrape across its footer when I had retrieved it. Captain Harold's final words were here. Alight with anxiety, I took the glass and strained to read the faded letters. It would be arduous work, carefully cleaning and revealing each stroke with utmost care. By Stiles' leave, I took the page to my cabin and continued that night by candle. Finally relenting to sleep, my dreams were tormented. I only heard one word in the black ink of the nightmares, whispered on frozen wind by dead voices. Agnes. The next morning, 4 of our crew were missing, and the weather had taken a turn. It was colder than normal, but a strong gale was bringing us home. Stiles was uneasy, and the men were quiet. We sailed hard. The damn jib line was creaking like mad all night as the Resolve cut the waves. And then we found Stiles, dead in his desk chair. His eyes had rolled back in his head, and both hands were frozen to the pine like melted glass. We were terrified. And by landfall, only 12 of us yet lived, with no explanation to offer the shoreman, the Duke, or even His Majesty at all. I wound up in possession of the journal pages. Bid journey to Grey to report to Henrik himself, that good king. That was 2 nights ago, before I heard the voice again. Devoid of sleep's mercy, I set to the page, intent on deciphering those faded words, and this I did, and I knew that I would be next. Here is a transcript from my notes on the letter, as best I can do. My beloved Agnes, we have been adrift 12 years almost to the day. 12 years on the ice, eating human flesh, and succumbing to the cold one by one. My crew remain loyal to me as I to you, dear Agnes. No dead seas can hold me. Somehow, some way, I will see that this letter reaches you, and think better of me for it if you can. And as for the failure of this doomed voyage, our son was spared the shame. He was the first of us to go blue, and we roasted him on Christmas morning. I may be quite mad at this point, my gentle wife, but heed my pledge. I will find a way to see this letter fulfilled, my death vow to admit our sins complete, and the souls of me and my crew free at last to go to hell for what we've done. Agnes, my dear. Dashes, lines, L-A-T-H, O's and W's. Then signed, Vigo Herald, Captain, HMS Octavius. The last letters fading, becoming messy ink, frozen. Now I sit here staring at the bluish parchment. It's coming. I feel it with every stir of cold air. God's that gentle breeze that turns men into screaming statues, stretching their necks backward into rigid death. Agnes, Agnes, he calls to her. He, or it, or them, is drawn to the letter. Some misguided hate of the final seconds of life, a ghost frozen to eternal wandering, and I am its only succor. There, at the door now. It comes. Frozen boots on the verge. The air grows cold as ice as I write. My ink pot has gone solid. Know that these pages are doomed, whoever may find this, and burn these words if fire even burn any longer in this cold world. There. It's just beyond the door. My fingers.